The docking bay of Orbital Station Helion 7 reeked of scorched metal and ozone. Elara Kane pushed her cleaning cart through the maze of cargo containers, her thin frame barely visible among the towering stacks of military supplies. The station hummed with the perpetual rhythm of an empire at war. Ships arriving, warriors departing, and somewhere in between, people like her keeping the machinery of conquest running. She paused to wipe down a transport platform still smoking from a recent landing. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, scrubbing away the residue left by alien starships. Around her, the docking bay teemed with activity. Kavrith warriors, massive reptilian beings with scales like burnished copper, strode past in formation, their telepathic war beasts padding beside them on 6 legs. The creatures were magnificent, part predator, part living weapon, their minds linked to their bonded warriors through the sacred nexus bond. Elara kept her eyes down. She'd learned long ago not to attract attention. "Make way for the broken one!" A harsh voice cut through the noise. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Commander Thexus, a mid-ranking Kavrith officer who seemed to take particular pleasure in reminding her of her place. His war beast, a sleek creature called a Velcrin, growled low as they approached. Still pretending to be useful human, Thexus stopped directly in her path, forcing her to halt. His yellow eyes gleamed with contempt. "Tell me, how does it feel to be the only creature in this station too damaged to bond? Even the lowest slave-class Kavrith can manage a basic nexus link." Elara straightened, meeting his gaze despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm doing my job, Commander." "Your job," he laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "Your job is to remind us why humans remain at the bottom of the Imperial hierarchy. You can't bond, you can't fight, you can barely communicate beyond your primitive verbal language. And yet, the Empire allows you to exist here, cleaning up after your betters." The Velcrin at his side snarled, picking up on its master's aggression. Elara felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the phantom sensation of walls closing in, of connections that refused to form. She'd tried to bond once, years ago, in the mandatory training all humans underwent when they came of age in Imperial space. The psychic backlash had nearly killed her. The healers called it nexus fracture, a traumatic severing of the pathways that allowed bonding. They said she was broken, unfixable. "Move along, Commander." A new voice, crisp and authoritative. "Some of us have actual work to do." Thexus turned with a snarl that died in his throat. The speaker was human, a rarity in this section of the station. Captain Marcus Webb, one of the few humans to successfully bond with a war beast and earn a position in the Imperial military. His Velcrin, a battle-scarred veteran named Razor, stood at his side with cold intelligence in its 6 eyes. "Captain Webb," Thexus's tone shifted to grudging respect. "I was merely... You were wasting time bullying a maintenance worker." Marcus's voice carried the weight of someone who'd earned his authority the hard way. "Don't you have a patrol to conduct?" Thexus's scales rippled with suppressed anger, but he couldn't challenge a superior officer. With a final contemptuous glance at Elara, he stalked away, his Velcrin following. Marcus waited until they were out of earshot before turning to Elara. "You okay?" "I'm fine." The lie came automatically. "Thank you, Captain. You don't have to thank me for basic decency." He studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "How long have you been working this sector?" 3 years. "And how many times has Thexus given you trouble?" Elara didn't answer. They both knew it happened almost daily. Marcus sighed. "Listen, I know it's not easy being here, especially for someone who..." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Someone who's broken?" Elara finished for him. "You can say it. Everyone else does." "I was going to say someone who's had a bad experience with bonding." Marcus's Velcrin shifted closer to him, and Elara saw his hand absently stroke the creature's scaled hide. The gesture spoke of a connection she'd never have. "But you're not broken, Elara. You're just different." Different. It was a kinder word, but it meant the same thing in the end. In an empire built on psychic bonds between warriors and beasts, someone who couldn't bond was less than useless. They were a reminder of weakness, of limitation, of everything the Kavrith Empire claimed to have transcended. "I should get back to work." Elara gestured at her cart. "The transport from the inner worlds is arriving in an hour. They'll want the bay clear." "Right." Marcus hesitated, then reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small data chip. "Here, access codes for the commissary on level 7. Better food than what they serve in the maintenance quarters." Consider it payment for putting up with idiots like Thexus. Elara took the chip, surprised by the gesture. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. But you deserve better than synth paste and recycled protein bars. He smiled, the expression transforming his war-hardened features. Take care of yourself, Elara. He left with his Velcrin, disappearing into the controlled chaos of the docking bay. Elara stood alone with her cleaning cart, the data chip warm in her palm. Small kindnesses were rare in her world. She'd learned to treasure them. The next hour passed in the familiar rhythm of her work. Scrub, rinse, move on. The transport arrived right on schedule, a massive Imperial cruiser that descended from the station's main docking port with a roar that shook the deck plating. Elara worked her way around the perimeter, staying clear of the disembarking passengers. Then the whispers started. Can't be the Emperor himself. What's he doing here? Elara looked up, her curiosity overriding her usual caution. The docking ramp had extended, but instead of the usual flow of soldiers and supplies, a single figure descended. The crowd of workers, warriors, and merchants parted like water before a blade. Emperor Kavrith walked like a man who'd conquered galaxies because he had. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, his scales a deep obsidian that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Where most Korvathi wore practical military armor, he was draped in robes that shimmered with captured starlight, and a crown of what looked like solidified void energy rested on his crested head. But it wasn't his appearance that commanded absolute silence. It was what walked beside him. The Velcrin was massive, easily twice the size of any war beast Elara had ever seen. Its scales rippled with colors that shouldn't exist, deep purples that bled into burning gold, patterns that hurt to look at directly. This was no ordinary bonded creature. This was Ashkore, the legendary beast that had been at the Emperor's side for 300 years through campaigns that had brought 100 worlds to their knees, and something was wrong with it. Elara saw it immediately, even from a distance. The way Ashkore moved, too stiff, too mechanical. The way its 6 eyes darted around with something that looked like confusion or pain. The Emperor's jaw was clenched, his own movements tightly controlled. The bond between them, visible to anyone with even rudimentary psychic sense as a shimmering connection in the air, flickered and sparked like a damaged power conduit. Station Commander Vexra hurried forward, her scales pale with anxiety. Your Imperial Majesty, we had no notification of your arrival. If we had known, I require privacy. Kavrith's voice was measured, but Elara heard the strain beneath it. Clear this bay, now. Of course, immediately! Vexra turned and began barking orders. Warriors scrambled to comply. Merchants grabbed their goods and fled. In moments, the massive docking bay was emptying. Elara grabbed her cart, ready to join the exodus. She'd almost made it to the access corridor when Ashkore's head snapped toward her. All 6 eyes locked onto her position. The creature's body tensed, muscles coiling. Then it screamed. The sound wasn't physical. It was psychic, a wave of anguish and rage that blasted through the bay like a shockwave. Elara felt it even through her nexus fracture, a sensation like knives dragging across the inside of her skull. Around her, bonded warriors and their beasts collapsed, overwhelmed by the feedback. The Emperor staggered, one hand clutching his head. Ashkore! His command cracked through the air. Stand down! The beast didn't obey. It lunged forward, moving with terrifying speed despite its size. Ilara's cart went flying as she dove aside. She hit the deck hard, her shoulder screaming in protest. When she looked up, Ashkore loomed over her, its massive jaws open to reveal rows of teeth like crystallized lightning. Elara knew she should feel terror. She should scream, should beg, should try to run. But as she stared up into those 6 eyes, she didn't see a monster. She saw pain, confusion, a creature trapped in its own torment, lashing out because it didn't know what else to do. Without thinking, she raised her hand. It's okay, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the chaos. I know what it's like, to be broken, to have everyone look at you and see something wrong. Ashkore's jaws hung open, inches from her face. Its breath was hot, smelling of ozone and alien spices. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The Emperor stood frozen, clearly preparing to forcibly restrain his own beast. The few remaining warriors had their weapons drawn, but seemed afraid to fire at such a legendary creature. Elara kept her hand extended. You're not a monster, she said softly. You're just hurting, and nobody sees it. Nobody except me. The The beast's eyes, all 6 of them, focused on her with sudden, piercing clarity. And then, impossibly, Ashkore lowered its massive head. The creature that had brought worlds to ruin, that had been bonded to the most powerful being in the known galaxy for 3 centuries, pressed its scaled snout gently against Elara Kane's outstretched palm. The silence in the docking bay was absolute. Emperor Kavrith stared at the scene before him, as if witnessing the fundamental laws of reality being rewritten. His bond with Ashkore, damaged and flickering for months, suddenly stabilized. Not because of anything he'd done, but because a human woman, a maintenance worker he'd never seen before, had touched his beast and somehow, impossibly, calmed the uncalmable. Elara felt warmth spreading from her palm up her arm. Not the searing psychic fire of a nexus bond. She still couldn't form those. This was something different, gentler, like the memory of a connection rather than the connection itself. Through it, she felt Ashkore's pain, an ancient injury, a fracture in the beast's own psychic architecture that had been growing worse for years. A fracture, just like hers. "Who are you?" The Emperor's voice was barely above a whisper. Elara looked up from Ashkore to meet the gaze of the most powerful being in the galaxy. His obsidian scales seemed less imposing now, his expression one of complete bewilderment. "Nobody, Your Majesty," she said quietly. "I'm nobody. They call me broken. Too fragile to bond." Kavrith descended the ramp slowly, approaching them as one might approach a miracle or a bomb, with equal parts reverence and caution. Ashkore remained still under Elara's touch, its breathing steady for the first time in months. "What did you do?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question from someone confronting something beyond his understanding. "I don't know." Elara's hand trembled against Ashkore's scales. I recognized the pain. I've felt it myself." The Emperor knelt. Not a casual crouch, but a full kneel that brought him to her level. The crown on his head caught the station's artificial light, casting prismatic shadows across the deck. In 300 years of rule, he had never knelt before anyone. "What is your name?" "Elara Kane, Your Majesty." "Elara Kane." He repeated it slowly, as if committing it to memory. "The broken one who calmed Ashkore. The human who touched what even I cannot fully reach anymore." His yellow eyes studied her with an intensity that should have been frightening. "Tell me, Elara Kane, do you know what you are? A maintenance worker?" "No." A strange expression crossed his features, something between hope and fear. "You're the answer to a question I've been asking for 5 years. Ever since the bond with my oldest companion began to fail, I have searched every world, consulted every mystic, interrogated every bonding master in the Empire. And now I find you here, scrubbing floors in a docking bay, dismissed as too broken to be useful." He reached out slowly, as if asking permission, and placed his own hand over hers where it rested on Ashkore. The moment they connected, Elara gasped. She felt the Emperor's bond with his beast, not the full psychic fusion she could never experience, but the echo of it. She felt centuries of companionship, of battles fought side by side, of a connection deeper than flesh or thought. And yes, she felt the damage, a slow corrosion eating away at the foundation of that bond, threatening to destroy them both. "You feel it," Kavrith said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Elara breathed. "It's like a wound that never healed properly. It's been there for so long that it became part of the structure. But it's wrong. It hurts. Can you fix it?" The question hung in the air between them. Behind them, Station Commander Vexra and a handful of recovered warriors watched in stunned silence. Elara became aware suddenly of how insane this scene must look. The Emperor of the known galaxy, kneeling in a docking bay, asking a broken human maintenance worker if she could heal what the Empire's greatest minds could not. "I don't know," Elara said honestly. "I've never healed anything. I can barely touch the Nexus without it feeling like I'm being torn apart. I'm not a bonding master or a mystic. I'm just someone who understands being broken." The Emperor's voice was soft, but carried absolute conviction. "Perhaps that's exactly what we need." He stood, still keeping one hand on Ashkore. The beast had closed its eyes, its massive body relaxed in a way that seemed impossible minutes ago. "Elara Kane, I am invoking Imperial privilege. As of this moment, you are under my personal protection and in my direct service. You will come with me, and you will attempt to heal what is damaged. If you succeed, I will give you anything within my power to grant. If you fail," he trailed off, but the implication was clear. Failure might mean the death of the galaxy's most legendary war beast. It might mean the end of the Emperor's own reign. and it would definitely mean the end of whatever brief respite Elara had found in her simple, invisible life. "Your Majesty," Commander Vexra interjected nervously. "Perhaps we should conduct proper testing, verify her abilities through controlled—" "No." Kavrith's tone brooked no argument. "Every moment the corruption spreads, Ashkore suffers. Every day I feel our bond weakening further. I have wasted 5 years on proper testing and controlled procedures. This human touched my beast and gave him peace for the first time in longer than I care to admit. That is all the verification I require." He looked back at Elara. "Will you come willingly, or must I compel you?" Elara thought about her cleaning cart, her tiny quarters in the maintenance sector, the daily humiliations and the small kindnesses. She thought about Captain Webb's words, "You're not broken, you're just different." She thought about Ashkore's pain, so like her own, and the inexplicable warmth that had flowed between them. "I'll come," she said quietly. "But Your Majesty, I need you to understand. I might make things worse. I might hurt him more. I might fail?" The Emperor smiled, a predatory expression that reminded Elara he hadn't conquered galaxies through kindness. "Then you'll fail, but you will try, because right now, you are the only being in my entire empire who has given me hope in 5 years, and I did not build this realm by refusing to gamble when the odds were desperate." He released Ashkore and offered Elara his hand. She stared at it, obsidian scales that had signed death warrants for billions, that had worn the blood of countless battlefields, now extended to her in something that looked almost like respect. She took it. The Emperor pulled her to her feet with surprising gentleness. Ashkore opened its eyes and made a sound. Not quite a purr, not quite a growl. Something that spoke of contentment and curiosity. The beast moved to stand beside Elara, positioning itself between her and the rest of the bay, as if it had already decided she was worth protecting. "Commander Vexra," Kavrith said without looking away from Elara, "prepare accommodations in the Imperial sector. Ms. Kane will require appropriate quarters, supplies, and privacy. Anyone who disturbs her without my explicit permission will answer to me personally." "Yes, Your Majesty, of course." Vexra practically tripped over herself in her haste to comply. As they moved toward the Emperor's ship, Elara caught a glimpse of the crowd that had gathered in the bay's upper observation deck. Hundreds of faces pressed against the transparent aluminum, watching the impossible scene below. She saw Thexus among them, his expression frozen in disbelief. She saw Captain Webb, his face split in an unbelieving grin. They were all watching the Broken One walk away with the Emperor. The ship's interior was beyond anything Elara had imagined. Where station corridors were utilitarian metal and exposed conduits, this was art made functional. Walls of what looked like crystallized starlight, floors that seemed to show the depth of space beneath them. The air itself tasted different, cleaner, richer, like breathing in possibility. "Your quarters are through there." Kavrith gestured to a doorway that materialized at his approach. "You'll find everything you need. Food, clothing, whatever technology you might require. If something is missing, ask for it and it will be provided." Elara peered through the doorway and saw a suite that was larger than the entire maintenance sector she'd called home. "Your Majesty, this is too much. I don't need—" "You are attempting to heal the bond between an emperor and his oldest companion. What you need is everything." He paused at another doorway. "I will return in 6 hours. Use that time to rest, to acclimate. When I come back, we will begin." "Begin what, exactly?" "Learning whether the Broken One can mend what is shattered." He looked at her with those ancient yellow eyes. "Or whether we are all simply clutching at false hope while the darkness closes in." Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the ship's depths with Ashkore padding silently behind him. Elara stood alone in the corridor, still wearing her stained maintenance coveralls, trying to process the last hour of her life. She was on the Emperor's personal ship. She'd been commanded to heal a legendary war beast. She'd gone from the lowest of the low to— what? A prisoner? An experiment? A miracle? Elara walked into her new quarters and sank onto a chair that probably cost more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. Through the viewport, she could see Station Helion 7 receding as the ship prepared to depart. Somewhere down there, her cleaning cart sat abandoned in the docking bay. Her old life, left behind like it had never mattered. Maybe it hadn't. She looked down at her hand, the one that had touched Ashkore, that had felt that strange warmth. There was nothing visibly different about it. No glow, no mark, no sign of whatever had passed between her and the beast. But she could still feel the echo of it. The recognition of one broken thing understanding another. They called her too fragile to bond. Maybe they'd been wrong about what that meant. Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled as the Emperor's ship turned toward the heart of the galaxy, toward whatever came next, toward hope or destruction, miracle or disaster, triumph or tragedy. Elara closed her eyes and tried not to think about the weight of an empire resting on her supposedly broken shoulders. Elara woke to silence, not the hollow mechanical silence of a space station, where even in the dead of cycle night, machinery hummed and ventilation systems whispered. This was a profound quiet, the kind that came from being surrounded by technology so advanced it made no sound at all. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then, memory crashed back. The Emperor, Ashkore, the impossible thing that had happened in the docking bay. She sat up in a bed that had molded itself perfectly to her body while she slept. The room was dimly lit by ambient light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Through the viewport, she could see they were no longer near Station Helion 7. Instead, an unfamiliar star system spread before her. 3 suns orbiting each other in an eternal dance, their light painting the viewport in shades of amber and rose. A soft chime sounded. Ms. Kane. The voice was neutral, artificial. You have been asleep for 7 hours. The Emperor requests your presence in the sanctum. Would you like assistance preparing? 7 hours. He'd said 6. Had he let her sleep? Or had she simply been too exhausted to wake on time? Yes. Assistance would be helpful. Elara had no idea what one wore to attempt the impossible for an emperor. A panel in the wall slid open, revealing a wardrobe that hadn't been there before. The clothes inside were unlike anything she'd owned, soft fabrics that shimmered with subtle patterns, boots that looked both practical and elegant, a long coat in deep blue that reminded her of Earth's oceans. Everything was in her size. How did you know? The ship's medical scanners assessed your measurements upon boarding, the AI explained. The Emperor instructed that you be provided with clothing suitable for someone of importance. These garments include environmental regulation, minor shielding, and are appropriate for formal Imperial settings. Someone of importance. The words felt absurd. Yesterday she'd been scrubbing coolant stains off deck plating. Elara dressed quickly, her hands fumbling with fastenings that seemed designed for people accustomed to fine things. The clothes fit perfectly, moving with her like a second skin. When she caught her reflection in a polished section of wall, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked like she belonged in the Emperor's court, not hiding in maintenance corridors. The sanctum is located in the ship's central chamber, the AI continued. I will guide you. Lights appeared in the floor, forming a pathway. Elara followed them through corridors that seemed to shift and change as she walked, as if the ship itself was alive and rearranging to accommodate her passage. She passed rooms whose purposes she couldn't begin to guess, chambers filled with floating geometric patterns, gardens that grew in defiance of physics, libraries where books made of crystallized light hovered in organized constellations. Finally, the path led to a massive circular door engraved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. It opened silently. The sanctum took Elara's breath away. The chamber was enormous, easily 100 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling that displayed the stars beyond the ship in perfect clarity. But it was the center of the room that commanded attention. There, on a raised platform, Emperor Kavrith sat in meditation. Ashkore lay beside him, the massive beast's body coiled protectively around its master. Between them, visible even to Elara's limited perception, the nexus bond flickered and pulsed. A connection that looked like spun starlight, beautiful and damaged all at once. Come. Kavrith didn't open his eyes, but his voice carried clearly across the space. Elara approached slowly, very aware that she was entering a sacred space. The bond between warrior and beast was considered deeply personal in Korvathi culture. To witness it this closely was a privilege reserved for family or the highest-ranking officers. She wasn't either of those things. She was a human maintenance worker who'd touched the untouchable. Your Majesty, she said quietly, I don't know if I can help. I don't even know where to begin. Then we learned together. Kavrith opened his eyes. In the sanctum's starlight, they seemed less harsh, more tired. For 3 centuries, I have been bonded to Ashkore. For 3 centuries, we have been one mind in 2 bodies, one purpose divided between flesh and scale. And for 5 years, I have felt that unity crumbling. Tell me, Elara Kane, what did you feel when you touched him? Elara thought back to that moment in the docking bay. Pain, she said finally. Not physical pain. something deeper, like something that was whole being slowly pulled apart, but so gradually that you almost don't notice until suddenly you realize you can barely hold yourself together. Kavrith's expression shifted. Surprise, recognition, something that might have been relief. You felt that? Truly felt it? I've felt it in myself for years. The admission came easier than expected. Ever since my own fracture, the healers said I damaged my nexus pathways too badly to ever bond. They said I was broken beyond repair. But it's not that the pathways are gone. They're just wrong, twisted, connected to places they shouldn't be and disconnected from places they should. And you think Ashkore suffers from something similar? I don't know. I'm not a healer or a bonding master. But when I touched him, I recognized something. A familiar wrongness. Elara moved closer to the platform. Ashkore's 6 eyes tracked her movement, but the beast made no aggressive gesture. May I? Kavrith nodded. Elara climbed onto the platform and knelt beside Ashkore's massive head. Up close, the beast was even more magnificent. Scales that seemed to contain entire nebulae, eyes that held intelligence older than most civilizations. She extended her hand slowly, giving the creature time to reject her if it chose. Ashkore leaned into her touch. The sensation was immediate, that same gentle warmth spreading through her palm. But this time, with her mind more settled and the chaos of the docking bay absent, she could sense more. The bond between Kavrith and Ashkore was like a vast web of light, intricate beyond imagination, and running through it, dark threads that didn't belong, corruption, decay, something that was slowly strangling the connection from within. There's something in the bond, Elara whispered. Something that doesn't belong. It's like an infection, but psychic. How long has this been happening? It began subtly, years ago. Kavrith's voice was controlled, but Elara heard the anguish beneath. After the Battle of the Shattered Moons, we faced an enemy who used psychic weapons, illegal even by the loosest interpretation of Imperial law. The weapons were designed to sever bonds, to turn war beasts against their masters. We won the battle, but Ashkore took the brunt of one such weapon to protect me. The healer said the damage was minimal, that the bond would naturally repair itself. But it didn't. No, it festered, slowly, imperceptibly at first. I thought I was imagining things. Moments where our thoughts didn't align perfectly, times when Ashkore hesitated before responding to my commands. By the time I realized something was truly wrong, the corruption had spread too far for conventional healing. Elara kept her hand on Ashkore's scales, feeling the pulse of that damaged bond. What did the bonding masters say? Kavrith's laugh was bitter, that it was impossible. A bond of our age and strength couldn't be corrupted in such a way, that I must be imagining it, or that it was natural decay from centuries of connection. Some suggested I should sever the bond entirely and attempt to bond with a new beast, as if Ashkore were equipment to be replaced when it malfunctions. You refused. Of course I refused. The Emperor's hand moved to rest on his beast's flank. Ashkore is not my weapon. He is my companion, my friend, my brother in all the ways that matter. We have walked through fire together, conquered worlds together, built an empire together. I would sooner cut off my own limbs than abandon him to this slow death. The raw emotion in his voice surprised Elara. She'd heard the stories about Emperor Kavrith, the conqueror, the tyrant, the being who'd crushed resistance on 100 worlds without mercy. She'd never imagined him capable of this kind of devotion. But the corruption is killing you both, she said softly. Yes, simple, honest. Within a year, perhaps 2, the bond will collapse entirely. The psychic backlash will destroy us both, or worse. It will turn Ashkore into a mindless beast, and I will be forced to end his life myself, rather than watch him suffer. Elara felt Ashkore shift beneath her hand. The beast made a sound low in its throat, not quite a growl, not quite a whimper. Through her touch, she felt its awareness of the conversation, its understanding of what was at stake. He knows, she breathed. He knows what's happening to him. He's terrified. As am I. Kavrith closed his eyes. I have faced death 1,000 times and never flinched. I have made decisions that ended billions of lives without losing sleep. But the thought of losing Ashkore, of failing the one being who has never failed me, that terrifies me in ways no enemy ever could. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fear. Elara looked at the bond, that beautiful, damaged thing, and tried to think. In the maintenance sector, when something was broken, you didn't just force it back together. You had to understand why it broke in the first place. You had to find the root of the problem, not just the symptoms. Tell me about the weapon, she said. The one that started this. How did it work? Kavrith opened his eyes, considering. It was designed to exploit the fundamental nature of the Nexus bond. You understand that a bond is a voluntary connection. Both warrior and beast must choose to link. The weapon used a psychic frequency that felt like a bonded partner calling for help. When Ashkore responded to what he thought was me in distress, the weapon inverted that response, turning his protective instinct into a pathway for corruption. So it used his loyalty against him. Essentially, yes. Elara thought about that. About a weapon that turned love into poison, devotion into destruction. It was obscene, but it also gave her an idea. What if the corruption is still using that same pathway? What if it's maintaining itself by mimicking a bond signal? The bonding masters explored that theory. They found no evidence of an external signal. Not external, internal. Elara's mind raced, connecting thoughts with the desperate logic of someone who had nothing to lose by being wrong. What if the weapon didn't just damage the bond? What if it left something behind? A psychic echo that keeps feeding the corruption by making it look like part of the natural bond structure. Kavrith leaned forward, interested now. If that were true, every healer who examined us should have detected it, unless they were looking for the wrong thing. Elara gestured at the flickering bond. Everyone keeps trying to heal you and Ashkore as if this is a normal injury, but it's not. It's a trap that's designed to hide inside something beautiful. The more you try to strengthen the bond through normal means, the more you feed whatever's corrupting it. Then how do we stop it? That was the question, wasn't it? Elara stared at her hand on Ashkore's scales, feeling that gentle warmth. She wasn't a healer. She couldn't navigate the Nexus like normal people. Her pathways were twisted, broken, wrong. My fracture, she said slowly. When I tried to bond, I damaged my Nexus pathways. The healers said they were twisted beyond repair. But what if that's exactly what I need? I don't understand. Normal Nexus pathways follow established routes, channels that have been reinforced through generations of bonding. But those channels are exactly what the corruption is hiding in. It's camouflaged itself in the normal flow of the bond. Elara met Kavrith's gaze. But my pathways don't follow normal routes. They're wrong, twisted. They connect to places they shouldn't and avoid places they should. Which means if I tried to sense the bond, you'd see it differently. Kavrith finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. What everyone else sees as normal, you would see as wrong. And what everyone else sees as wrong might be exactly where the corruption is hiding. Elara's heart hammered. Your Majesty, I can't promise this will work. I can't even promise I won't make things worse. But if you'll let me try, if you'll let me touch the bond with my broken pathways, I might be able to see what everyone else is missing. Kavrith was silent for a long moment. Outside the sanctum, the three suns continued their eternal dance, casting shifting shadows across the chamber. Ashkore rumbled softly, a sound that seemed to carry both question and consent. You understand what you're asking? The Emperor's voice was soft. To touch another's bond is intimate beyond words. It's not just seeing thoughts or feelings. It's experiencing the very essence of who we are. You would see every moment of our shared existence, every battle, every decision, every moment of doubt and triumph. You would know me, know us, in ways that no one else ever has. I know. Elara's voice trembled, but her hand remained steady on Ashkore. But I also know that if I don't try, you'll both die. And I can't watch that happen. Not when I might be able to help. Why? The question was genuine. You owe us nothing. I am the Emperor of a realm that has given you nothing but contempt. Ashkore is a war beast of the species that calls you broken. Why risk yourself for us? Elara thought about Captain Webb's words. You're not broken. You're just different. She thought about years of humiliation, of being called useless, of being told she was too damaged to matter. And she thought about Ashkore's pain. That terrible, familiar wrongness that she recognized because she'd lived with it herself for so long. Because someone has to see you, she said quietly. Not the Emperor, not the legendary war beast, just two people who are hurting and scared and don't want to lose each other. I see that. And maybe that's what being broken really means. Not that you can't connect, but that you connect to things everyone else overlooks. Kavrith studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached out and placed his hand over hers where it rested on Ashkore. Then look, he said softly. Look with your broken eyes and see what we've missed. But Elara, if this goes wrong, If you feel yourself being pulled into the corruption, you must pull back immediately. I will not add your death to my list of failures. I'll be careful. No. His grip tightened. Promise me. Your life is not expendable, regardless of what the Empire has taught you. Promise me you'll retreat if you must. The intensity in his voice startled her. I promise. He released her hand. Then begin. Elara closed her eyes and let herself fall into the sensation she'd been holding at bay. That warmth, that connection, that strange and gentle pathway her twisted nexus formed when she touched Ashkore. It didn't feel like the bonds she'd witnessed between other warriors and beasts. There was no psychic fusion, no overwhelming sense of two minds becoming one. Instead, it was like being able to see the space between things, the gaps and shadows that normal bonds filled so completely there was no room to notice them. And in those gaps, she saw the corruption. It was beautiful in its horror, threads of darkness woven so carefully into the bond structure that they seemed like they belonged there. They pulsed with a rhythm that almost matched the natural flow of connection between Kavrith and Ashkore. Almost, but not quite. Through her twisted pathways, Elara could see the tiny discrepancies, the places where the corruption's rhythm lagged just slightly behind the true bond, the spots where it had inserted itself into the flow of thoughts and emotions, not quite perfectly mimicking the genuine article. It was hiding in plain sight, and it was killing them. I see it, she whispered. Oh gods, I see it. Can you reach it? Kavrith's voice seemed to come from very far away. Could she? Elara extended her awareness carefully, following her broken pathways deeper into the bond. It was like walking through a forest where all the paths were overgrown and wrong, where every step took her in unexpected directions. But those unexpected directions were exactly what she needed. They took her around the corruption's camouflage, let her approach from angles that shouldn't exist. She got closer, closer, until she could almost touch the nearest thread of darkness. Then it noticed her. The corruption surged, recognizing an intrusion. Pain exploded through Elara's mind, not the gradual ache of her fracture, but sudden, vicious agony. She gasped, feeling herself being pulled deeper, the corruption trying to use her own pathways against her, trying to spread into her, just as it had spread into Ashkore. Pull back! Kavrith's command cut through the pain. But Elara saw something. In that moment of contact, she'd felt the corruption's origin point, the place where the psychic weapon had first struck, where the initial thread of darkness had been planted like a seed. It was deep in the bond's structure, hidden so thoroughly that 5 years of healers had never found it. She knew where it was now. She could mark it, could maybe. The corruption wrapped around her twisted pathways, squeezing. Elara screamed. Kavrith tore her hand away from Ashkore. The connection severed instantly. Elara collapsed on the platform, gasping for air, her mind reeling from the abrupt disconnection. The Emperor caught her before she could fall, his scaled hands surprisingly gentle. Are you injured? Speak to me. I'm okay. Elara's voice shook. Her whole body trembled with aftershocks of pain. I'm okay. It tried to spread to me, but it couldn't. My pathways are too broken for it to follow properly. You were screaming. It hurt, but I'm okay. She forced herself to sit up, though the world spun alarmingly. Your Majesty, I found it. The origin point. The place where the weapon first struck. Kavrith's eyes widened. Where? Deep. Deeper than anyone's been looking. Because it's hidden in a part of the bond that should be dormant. A pathway that you and Ashkore established in your first years together, but haven't actively used in decades. The corruption is anchored there, using that dormant pathway as a hiding place while it spreads through the active bonds. Can it be removed? Elara met his gaze. I think so, but not by me, not directly. My pathways let me see it, but I'm not strong enough to excise something that deep. It would be like trying to perform surgery with broken tools. Disappointment flickered across Kavrith's face, quickly masked. Then we're no better off than before. No, we're much better off. Elara pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. The Emperor steadied her with a hand on her elbow. We know where it is now. We know how it's hiding. That's half the battle. Now we just need to figure out how to cut it out without destroying the bond in the process. And you have a theory on how to do that. Maybe. Elara looked at Ashkore. The beast was watching her intently, all 6 eyes focused with that unnerving intelligence. The corruption is strong because it's been growing for 5 years, reinforcing itself in your bond structure. But it's also inflexible. It can only exist in established pathways. It can't adapt to anything truly new, because it's not alive. It's a weapon's echo. Exactly. Which means if we create a new pathway, something it can't predict or adapt to, we might be able to bypass its defenses and reach the origin point. Elara took a shaky breath. We need to forge a temporary bond. Between you, Ashkore, and me. The silence that followed was absolute. That's impossible, Kavrith said finally. You can't bond. You said so yourself. I can't bond normally, but I can connect through my broken pathways. You've seen that. It's not a true nexus bond, but it's something. And something is enough if it gives us a route the corruption doesn't expect. You're suggesting we intentionally create a broken bond. A different bond, Elara corrected. One that follows routes so wrong that the corruption won't even recognize them as viable pathways. We use that to get to the origin point. Then you and Ashkore, working together through your real bond, can excise the corruption while I hold the pathway open. Kavrith shook his head slowly. The psychic strain of attempting such a thing. Elara, you barely survived touching the bond's edges. What you're describing would put you at the center of a connection between beings whose combined psychic power could level cities. The feedback alone could destroy your mind. Probably. She met his gaze steadily. But if we don't try, you'll both die anyway. At least this way, there's a chance. A chance that costs you everything. Maybe. Or maybe I finally find out what it's like to be connected. Really connected. Even if just for a moment. Elara smiled, though she felt anything but confident. For someone who spent years being called too broken to bond, that doesn't seem like a bad way to go. You're serious. Completely. Kavrith looked at Ashkore. The beast rumbled, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to fill the sanctum. After a moment, the Emperor nodded slowly. He agrees, though he likes this plan as little as I do. He turned back to Elara. But if we're to attempt this insanity, we do it properly. Not here, not now, while you're still recovering from that first touch. We go to the Imperial Sanctum on Krithion Prime. There, we'll have access to every safeguard and support system in the Empire. If this goes wrong, I know, I'll probably die. You'll definitely die, Kavrith corrected bluntly. But at least on Krithion, we can ensure the death is as painless as possible. And if by some miracle you survive, you'll have the best healers in the galaxy ready to put your mind back together. It wasn't exactly reassuring, but it was more consideration than Elara had expected from someone with the title of Emperor. How long until we reach Krithion? 3 days. Use them wisely. Rest. Recover. Make peace with your choice. He helped her down from the platform. And Elara, thank you. For seeing us. For trying. No matter what happens, you've given us something we haven't had in 5 years. What's that? Hope. The word hung in the air as Elara left the sanctum, her legs still unsteady, her mind reeling from what she'd agreed to. 3 days until they reached Krithion Prime. 3 days until she attempted the impossible. 3 days until she either saved the Emperor and his beloved beast, or died trying. She thought about her promise to pull back if things went wrong. About Kavrith's insistence that her life mattered. About Ashkore's 6 eyes watching her with something that looked almost like trust. 3 days. It seemed like too long and not nearly long enough. Krithion Prime hung in space like a jewel carved from ambition itself. Elara stood at the viewport of the Emperor's ship, watching as the capital world grew larger. She'd seen images of Krithion before. Every citizen of the Empire had, but pictures couldn't capture the reality. The planet's surface was covered in cities that stretched from pole to pole, structures so massive they were visible from orbit. Floating platforms drifted in the upper atmosphere, connected by bridges of light. And at the equator, dominating everything else, the Imperial Palace rose like a mountain that had been sculpted into architecture. 3 days had passed since the sanctum. 3 days of rest, preparation, and increasingly frequent nightmares about what was to come. Impressive, isn't it? Captain Theron's voice made Elara turn. The Korvathi warrior had been assigned as her escort once they reached Krithion, a necessity apparently for someone under direct Imperial protection. He was younger than most of the Emperor's guard, his scales a lighter copper than the deep bronze of the veterans, but his eyes held the careful assessment of someone trained to protect. It's overwhelming, Elara admitted. That's intentional. The Empire wants visitors to understand its power before they ever set foot in the palace. Theron moved to stand beside her at the viewport. You've never been to Krithion before? I've never been anywhere important before. She glanced at him. Over the past 3 days, Theron had proven to be surprisingly easy to talk to, perhaps because he was young enough to remember what it felt like to be uncertain. Until a few days ago, the most impressive place I'd seen was the inside of a maintenance corridor. And now you're about to attempt something that could reshape Imperial history. He said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. How does that feel? Terrifying. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. He gestured toward the planet. We'll be landing at the private Imperial dock. From there, you'll be taken directly to the Nexus Sanctum, the most secure and advanced bonding facility in known space. Everything you could possibly need has been prepared. Everything except a guarantee this will work. If guarantees existed, His Majesty wouldn't need you. Theron's tone was gentle. But for what it's worth, I've served the Emperor for 5 years. I've watched him search desperately for a solution to Ashkore's condition. I've seen him refuse to give up even when every expert said it was hopeless. And in all that time, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Elara blinked. What do you mean? Like you're the answer to a prayer he didn't think anyone was listening to. Theron smiled slightly. The Emperor doesn't kneel for anyone, Ms. Kane. But he knelt for you. That means something. Before Elara could respond, the ship shuddered slightly. The transition from deep space flight to atmospheric entry. Through the viewport, Krithion's surface rushed up to meet them. She caught glimpses of the city below. Towers that scraped the clouds, gardens suspended on anti-gravity platforms, rivers of traffic flowing through canyons of glass and metal. The landing was so smooth she barely felt it. The viewport polarized, blocking the harsh sunlight of Krithion's primary star. A moment later, the door to the observation deck slid open and Emperor Kavrith entered. He looked different than he had in the sanctum, more formal. The robes of starlight were gone, replaced by armor that seemed to be carved from a single piece of black diamond. The crown sat heavier on his head, a physical reminder of power and responsibility. But his eyes, when they found Elara, held the same exhaustion she'd seen 3 days ago. We've arrived, he said unnecessarily. Are you ready? No. Yes, Your Majesty. The Nexus Sanctum has been cleared. Only my most trusted advisors and the master healers will be present. People I would trust with my life. They've been briefed on what we're attempting, though several think I've lost my mind. A slight smile. They may be right. If you've changed your mind, Elara began. I haven't. The smile faded. But I want you to understand what you're walking into. The Nexus Sanctum is designed to handle catastrophic bond failures. If things go wrong, it will contain the psychic backlash to protect the rest of the palace. But contained or not, the forces we'll be working with could unmake you at the most fundamental level. There will be no pain, the Sanctum will ensure that. But there will be cessation. Do you understand? You're saying if I fail, I'll just stop existing. Essentially, yes. Your body will remain, but everything that makes you Elara Kane will be gone. The healers might be able to keep you alive, but you won't be you anymore. It should have been more frightening than it was. But Elara had spent years being told she was broken, useless, less than whole. The idea of ceasing to exist didn't seem much worse than continuing to exist as someone the galaxy had already decided didn't matter. I understand, she said quietly. I'm ready. Kavrith studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Captain Theron will escort you to the preparation chambers. I must attend to some final arrangements. We'll begin in 2 hours. 2 hours. Elara's stomach clenched, but she managed a nod. The Emperor turned to leave, then paused. Elara, regardless of what happens today, you should know that you've already succeeded in one thing. You've reminded me that there are people in my empire worth more than their utility. Thank you for that. He left before she could respond. Theron gestured toward the exit. This way, Ms. Kane. The walk through the Imperial Palace was surreal. Corridors wide enough to fly ships through, walls decorated with the captured banners of conquered worlds, guards whose armor probably cost more than entire space stations. Everyone they passed stopped and stared at Elara, not with the contempt she was used to, but with curiosity and something that might have been awe. They've heard about you, Theron explained quietly. Word spread quickly that the Emperor found someone who could touch Ashkore. By now, half the court knows he's attempting a desperate healing. The other half thinks he's finally succumbed to the madness they've been predicting for years. Which half are you? Neither. I think you're either going to save him or die trying. And either way, that takes more courage than most people in this palace will ever have. They reached a door guarded by 2 warriors whose scales were marked with the Emperor's personal sigil. The guards stepped aside without a word, and the door opened onto a chamber that looked more like a luxury suite than a preparation room. You have 2 hours, Theron said. There's food if you can stomach it. Facilities for washing, and if you need anything at all, just ask the room's AI. He hesitated. For what it's worth, I hope this works. Not just for the Emperor's sake, but for yours. You deserve to know what it feels like to be connected. He left, and Elara was alone. She explored the room mechanically, her mind too full of what was coming to really appreciate the luxury around her. The washing facilities were beyond anything she'd seen. Water that responded to thought, temperature that adjusted automatically, soaps that smelled like plants from a dozen different worlds. She cleaned herself carefully, trying not to think about whether this might be the last time she'd do something so ordinary. When she emerged, clean clothes had been laid out. Not the fancy garments she'd been wearing, but something simpler, a fitted bodysuit in deep gray, designed for comfort and flexibility. Medical gear, she realized. The kind of thing you wore when your body needed to be monitored constantly. Elara dressed and forced herself to eat a little. The food was excellent and tasted like ashes in her mouth. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the AI spoke. "Ms. Kane, it is time. Please follow the guidance lights to the Nexus Sanctum." This was it. Elara followed the lights through corridors that grew progressively more austere. The opulence of the palace fell away, replaced by functional architecture that spoke of serious purpose. Other lights joined hers, orange and gold, converging from different directions. She realized they were guiding others to the sanctum as well, the healers and advisors Kavrith had mentioned. The sanctum doors were massive, 50 feet tall, carved with scenes of bonds being forged. They opened silently as Elara approached, revealing a chamber that took her breath away. The room was circular, easily 200 feet across, with a domed ceiling that displayed the stars above Krithion. But unlike the sanctum on the ship, this one was clearly designed for medical intervention. Equipment lined the walls, machines whose purposes Elara couldn't begin to guess, monitoring stations that flickered with data streams, medical pods that stood ready to receive patients. In the center of the room, a raised platform held 3 positions: a throne-like seat for the Emperor, a cushioned area sized for Ashkore, and between them, a smaller chair that was obviously meant for her. Kavrith was already there, standing beside the platform. Ashkore lay at his feet, the massive beast's body coiled in a deceptively relaxed posture. Around the room's perimeter, a dozen figures in healer robes waited, Korvathi, mostly, though Elara spotted at least 2 other species among them. Ms. Kane, one of the healers approached, an elderly Korvathi female whose scales had faded to pale silver with age. "I am Master Healer Kavrith. I will be monitoring your vital signs throughout the procedure. Do you understand what we're about to attempt?" "I think so. We're going to create a temporary bond using my unusual pathways. That bond will give us access to the corruption's origin point. Then the Emperor and Ashkore will excise it while I hold the pathway open." A crude but accurate summary. Kavrith's tone was professional, but Elara detected skepticism beneath it. "I must tell you that I advised strongly against this approach. The psychic forces involved could kill you in dozens of different ways, many of which we won't be able to prevent even with all our equipment." "I know. And yet you proceed anyway. The Emperor is dying. Ashkore is dying. I might be able to help. What else matters?" Kavrith studied her for a long moment. "I have spent 2 centuries healing bonds, Ms. Kane. I have seen warriors sacrifice themselves for their beasts, and beasts die to protect their bonded partners. But I have never seen someone with no bond at all willing to risk everything for strangers. Either you are the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish. Can't I be both?" Despite herself, Kavrith smiled. "Perhaps. Come, let's get you prepared." The next 30 minutes were a blur of medical procedures. Sensors attached to her temples, her wrists, her chest. Neural monitors that would track her brain activity. Psychic dampeners that would shut everything down instantly if the corruption tried to spread to her. Kavrith explained each step carefully, making sure Elara understood both what they were for and what they couldn't protect against. "If your consciousness begins to fragment," the healer said as she adjusted a final sensor, "you'll have perhaps 3 seconds of awareness before total dissolution. In that time, you must use every ounce of will you possess to pull back from the bond. Do you understand? 3 seconds to save my own life. Understood. It's not enough time. It's never enough time." Kavrith's expression was grim. "But it's all we can give you. The rest is up to your own strength and luck." Finally, the preparations were complete. Kavrith stepped back, and Kavrith approached. He had removed his armor, wearing now only simple robes that left his arms bare. Elara could see scars on his scales, hundreds of them, each one a memory of battle survived. "Last chance to change your mind," he said quietly. "I'm not changing my mind." Then take your place. And Elara, he hesitated. If this works, you'll see everything. Every battle, every decision, every moment of my 300-year bond with Ashkore. Some of those moments are not pleasant. Some involve actions I'm not proud of. You'll know me as I truly am, without pretense or protection. Are you prepared for that? Elara thought about it. Your Majesty, I've spent years being invisible, being overlooked. If sharing your bond means being truly seen, even for just a moment, then yes, I'm prepared. He nodded slowly. Then let's begin. Elara climbed onto the platform and settled into the chair between Kavrith and Ashkore. The Emperor took his throne. Ashkore shifted, positioning his massive head within reach of both of them. Around the room, the healers moved to their stations. Equipment hummed to life, filling the air with a sound like singing crystal. The process will happen in stages, Kairos called out from her station. First, Ms. Kane will establish her unusual connection with Ashkore. Once that's stable, the Emperor will gradually open his bond to include her pathway. At that point, they'll begin the search for the corruption's origin. Do not attempt to rush any stage. Take your time. Let each level stabilize before moving forward. Understood. Kavrith's hand rested on Ashkore's flank. Elara, whenever you're ready. Elara took a deep breath and reached out to touch Ashkore's scales. The familiar warmth greeted her immediately, but this time, instead of pulling back, she let herself sink into it. Let her broken pathways extend, reaching through that strange space between true connection and total separation that only she seemed able to navigate. Ashkore's consciousness brushed against hers. It wasn't the overwhelming fusion of a nexus bond, but a gentler thing, like two people standing close enough to feel each other's warmth without touching. Through it, she felt the beast's curiosity, its cautious trust, and underneath everything, the constant low note of pain from the corruption that had been eating at its bond for 5 years. I'm in, she whispered. It's stable. Remarkable. Kairos's voice held genuine wonder. I'm reading psychic activity, but it's unlike any bond formation I've ever seen. It's as if she's found pathways we didn't know existed. Because they shouldn't exist, another healer muttered. That's what happens when someone breaks their nexus so badly it heals wrong. Perhaps. Or perhaps we've been too narrow in our understanding of what connection means. Kairos checked her monitors. Your Majesty, her readings are stable. You may proceed. Kavrith closed his eyes. Elara felt more than saw what happened next. The massive, ancient bond between Emperor and Beast beginning to open, extending toward the small, strange connection she'd formed with Ashkore. It was like watching a river change course to flow toward a stream, power and purpose bending to accommodate something new. The moment their bonds touched, Elara gasped. Suddenly she could feel them both, Kavrith and Ashkore, separate and together, centuries of shared experience flowing between them. She saw battles fought on worlds whose names she didn't know, saw the young Kavrith, barely more than a juvenile, meeting Ashkore for the first time and feeling that spark of recognition that said they were meant to be bonded, saw them grow together, fight together, build an empire together through blood and fire and unshakable conviction. She saw the good and the terrible in equal measure, saw Kavrith's genuine love for his people and his equally genuine willingness to destroy anyone who threatened them. Saw the weight of command crushing him slowly, year by year, until only Ashkore's presence kept him from breaking under the burden. Saw the beast's absolute loyalty and the moments of doubt that loyalty cost him. And through it all, she saw the love, the deep, abiding, unbreakable love between a warrior and his bonded companion. I see you, Elara breathed. I see both of you, and we see you. Kavrith's voice came from very close and very far away simultaneously. Through the bond, she felt his recognition, not of her history or her actions, but of her essence, the stubborn courage that kept her going despite years of being told she was worthless, the compassion that let her recognize pain in others because she knew it so well herself, the terrible, beautiful strength of someone who'd been broken, but refused to stay that way. The readings are stabilizing, Kairos reported. The three-way connection is holding. Your Majesty, you should be able to guide Ms. Kane deeper into the bond structure now. Elara. Kavrith's presence in the bond was warm, solid, reassuring. I'm going to take you to the place where the corruption anchors. Follow my lead. If at any point you need to pull back, I know. 3 seconds to save myself. I'm ready. They descended together into the depths of the bond. Through Elara's broken pathways, the structure looked different than it would to anyone else. Where a normal bonding master would see a smooth, elegant flow of connection, she saw the reality underneath. the complex tangle of threads and channels that made up 3 centuries of shared consciousness. And there, hidden in a section that should have been dormant, she saw it. The corruption. It was worse up close. What had looked like simple dark threads from a distance revealed itself as something more insidious, a malignant structure that had grown like crystallized cancer through the bond's foundation. It pulsed with a sickening rhythm, feeding off the very connection it was destroying. There, Elara's voice shook. That's the origin point, where the weapon struck. I see it. Kavrith's presence moved closer. Through their connection, Elara felt his fury and grief at finally seeing what had been killing his bond. It's grown deeper than I thought. Removing it will require cutting through pathways we use constantly. The pain will be... He stopped. Ashkore, are you certain? The beast's response came as a feeling rather than words. Determination mixed with trust, and an acceptance that some pain was worth enduring if it meant survival. Then we begin. Kavrith's attention focused like a blade. Elara, I need you to hold the pathway open while we work. The corruption will try to close it, to hide itself again. Don't let it. I won't. What followed was the most difficult thing Elara had ever done. Kavrith and Ashkore began the delicate, agonizing work of excising the corruption's origin point. It wasn't like cutting with a knife. It was more like carefully unwinding threads that had been woven into the fabric of their bond, separating poison from essence without destroying either. Every separation sent shockwaves through the connection. Every thread removed made the corruption fight harder to maintain its hold. And through it all, Elara held the pathway open. Her broken pathways, twisted and wrong as they were, provided a route that the corruption couldn't predict or block. It tried. Oh, how it tried. She felt it reaching for her, trying to spread into her mind the way it had spread through Kavrith and Ashkore's bond. But her fractures, her damage, her wrongness, they protected her. The corruption couldn't follow pathways that didn't make sense. Time lost meaning. Seconds or hours might have passed. All Elara knew was pain, not her own, but theirs. She felt every moment of agony as Kavrith cut through connections he'd relied on for centuries, felt Ashkore's suffering as parts of his consciousness were temporarily severed, felt the corruption's death throes as it fought against its own dissolution. Almost there, Kavrith's voice was strained. The last thread. Elara, when I cut this, the corruption will make one final attempt to spread. It will go for the nearest pathway. Yours. You must be ready to close off your connection instantly. I can't close it. Elara's awareness of her physical body was fading, her consciousness subsumed into the bond. If I close it, the pathway collapses and you can't finish the cut. Then you'll take the corruption's final surge directly. I know. It will destroy you. Probably. But you'll survive. That's what matters. Elara! Cut it. Her voice was firm despite the fear flooding through her. Cut it now, before I lose my nerve. She felt Kavrith's hesitation, his desperate desire to find another way. But there was no other way. There never had been. This was always how it was going to end, with her holding the door open for the poison to rush through, buying time for them to seal it behind. Thank you, Kavrith whispered. For everything. He cut the final thread. The corruption exploded outward with the force of a dying star. It rushed toward Elara's pathway, sensing the escape route, desperate to survive by spreading into a new host. She felt it coming, a wave of malignant wrongness that would unmake her at the most fundamental level. 3 seconds, Kairos had said. 3 seconds to save herself. Elara used those 3 seconds to hold the pathway open. The corruption slammed into her awareness with apocalyptic force. She felt her sense of self beginning to fray, her memories starting to dissolve, her consciousness fragmenting under the assault. In the physical world, alarms were screaming, healers were shouting, equipment was overloading. And in the bond, Kavrith and Ashkore completed the seal. The pathway closed. The corruption, trapped in Elara's broken pathways with nowhere to spread, began to die. Without a proper bond structure to anchor itself, it had no way to survive in her twisted, fractured channels. But neither did she. Elara felt herself coming apart, felt the pieces of who she was scattering like ashes in a storm. She tried to hold on, tried to remember her name, her purpose, why any of this had mattered. But it was like trying to hold water in a net. Everything just slipped through. The last thing she felt before darkness took her was a presence, vast and ancient and desperate, wrapping around her fragmenting consciousness. Kavrith. He'd followed her into the dissolution, refusing to let her face it alone. You will not die alone. His voice echoed through the void. "You will not become nothing. I swear it." Then there was nothing at all. Pain was the first thing that returned. Not physical pain, something deeper, more fundamental. The sensation of pieces that didn't quite fit together anymore, fragments of consciousness that had been scattered and were now being slowly, painstakingly reassembled. It felt wrong. It felt incomplete. It felt like being alive. Elara's eyes opened to darkness. For a terrifying moment, she thought she'd been blinded, that the corruption had taken her sight along with everything else. Then she realized the darkness was simply the absence of light. She was in a room with the illumination turned down low. She tried to sit up. Her body didn't respond immediately. There was a lag between intention and action, as if her mind and flesh had to relearn how to communicate. On the third attempt, she managed to push herself upright. The movement sent vertigo spinning through her head. "Easy," a voice from the darkness. "You've been unconscious for 6 days. Your body needs time to remember how to function." Elara's eyes adjusted enough to make out a figure sitting beside her bed, scales that gleamed pale silver in the dim light. Master Healer Kavrith. 6 days? Elara's voice came out as a rasp. Her throat felt like she'd been screaming. "You were screaming," Kavrith said, as if reading her thoughts. "For the first 3 days, intermittently. Your consciousness was trying to reintegrate, and the process was traumatic. We kept you sedated to prevent you from injuring yourself." Memories came flooding back. The sanctum, the bond, the corruption rushing toward her like a tidal wave of malignant wrongness, the sensation of coming apart at the seams, and through it all, a presence holding her together. Kavrith's consciousness wrapped around hers, refusing to let her dissolve completely. "The Emperor," Elara managed. "Is he alive, whole?" The corruption was completely removed. Kavrith stood and moved to a control panel. The lights rose gradually, revealing a medical suite that was somehow both austere and luxurious. "The procedure was successful, Ms. Kane. Against all probability and most of my expectations, you saved them both. Ashkore? Healthy. The bond is stronger than it's been in years. Already we're seeing improvements, response times, psychic clarity, even physical vitality." The healer returned to her seat, studying Elara with an expression that was hard to read. "You did the impossible. You should be dead. By every measure we have, your consciousness should have fragmented beyond any hope of recovery. But somehow you're here. Damaged, yes. Changed, certainly. But here." Elara looked down at her hands. They looked the same. Pale skin, calluses from years of manual labor, the small scar on her left thumb from a cleaning accident years ago. But she could feel the difference inside. The pathways that had been broken before were now, she didn't have words for it. Not healed exactly, but reorganized, reshaped by the trauma of what she'd endured. "What did he do?" she asked quietly. "The Emperor. I felt him at the end. He followed me into the dissolution." Kavrith was silent for a long moment. "He did something I've never seen in 200 years of healing bonds. When your consciousness began to fragment, he used his bond with Ashkore as a framework, a template, essentially, and wrapped it around your scattered awareness. He held the pieces of you together through sheer force of will while we worked to reintegrate them. It should have killed him. The psychic strain alone should have burned out his mind. But he held on for 3 days straight, never wavering, never letting go. He saved you, Ms. Kane, just as you saved him." Elara felt something tighten in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I want to see him. He's been here every day. Sometimes sitting where I sit now, sometimes pacing, sometimes simply standing at your bedside in silence. I've never seen him like this. Vulnerable, uncertain, afraid." Kavrith stood. "I'll tell him you're awake. But first, you need to understand something. What you experienced has changed you. Your nexus pathways are different now. Not broken the way they were before, but not normal either. Something new. We don't know what that means yet. Something new," Elara repeated softly. Her whole life she'd been something broken. Maybe being something new wouldn't be worse. Kavrith left, and Elara was alone with her thoughts. She explored carefully, testing the edges of her awareness the way she might probe a healing wound. The pathways that had been twisted and fractured before felt different now, not straight and normal, but organized in their strangeness, like they'd been broken and then rebuilt according to a blueprint that didn't follow conventional rules. She sensed something else too, a lingering warmth that felt familiar, the echo of Kavrith's presence, still there in the spaces where he'd held her consciousness together. It wasn't a bond, not in any traditional sense, but it was a connection, a thread between them that hadn't existed before. The door opened. Emperor Kavrith entered, and Elara barely recognized him. Gone was the armor, the crown, the trappings of absolute power. He wore simple robes and looked like he hadn't slept properly in days. His scales, usually gleaming obsidian, seemed dull, but his eyes, those ancient yellow eyes, lit up when they found her awake and aware. Elara. Her name was a prayer of relief. He crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped beside her bed, his hands hovering as if he wanted to touch her but didn't dare. You're awake. You're truly awake. I'm awake. She managed a weak smile. Kairos said you saved me. You saved yourself. I merely kept the pieces together while you found your way back. He pulled a chair close and sat heavily, as if his legs could no longer support him. I thought I'd lost you. For 3 days I felt your consciousness slipping through my grasp, and there was nothing I could do except hold on and hope it was enough. Those were the longest 3 days of my life. Longer than 3 centuries of empire building? Infinitely longer. His voice was quiet but intense. Elara, I have commanded armies, conquered worlds, made decisions that affected trillions of lives. But I have never felt as powerless as I did watching you suffer for a sacrifice you made for me. For us. It worked, though. The corruption is gone. Completely. Ashkore and I are whole again. Stronger even than before the weapon struck. The bond feels... He trailed off, searching for words. Clean. Pure. The way it did in our first years together. You gave that back to us. Then it was worth it. No. The word came out sharp, almost angry. Your life is not worth less than mine, no matter what the Empire has taught you. You are not expendable. You are not a tool to be used and discarded. You are... He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. You matter, Elara Kane. You matter. The intensity of his words, the raw emotion behind them, left Elara speechless. She'd spent years being told she didn't matter, that her inability to bond made her less than worthless. And here was the Emperor himself, the most powerful being in known space, insisting otherwise with a conviction that felt like it could reshape reality. I don't know how to be someone who matters, she said finally, her voice small. Then we'll figure it out together. Kavrith reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. When she didn't, he took her hand in his scaled ones. The touch sent a gentle warmth through her, an echo of the connection that had saved her life. Elara, while you were unconscious, I made some decisions. I want you to know about them before they're officially announced. What kind of decisions? The kind that will change your life, assuming you agree to them. He took a breath. First, you're being granted full Imperial citizenship with all rights and privileges. No more living in maintenance quarters. No more being treated as lesser because of your nexus status. You'll have wealth, position, protection. Your Majesty, I don't need... Let me finish. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. Second, I'm establishing a new position. Imperial Nexus Consul. Someone who can work with bonds that don't fit conventional categories. Someone who can help others like you. People whose pathways are different but not broken. I want you to fill that position. Elara stared at him. You want me to be a healer. I don't have any training. You have experience that no amount of training can provide. You understand being different. You've lived with pathways that work in ways no one else can follow. And most importantly, you see things that everyone else misses. That's more valuable than any formal education. But I'm not... She struggled to find words. I'm just a maintenance worker. I clean floors. I'm nobody. You were never nobody. Kavrith's voice was firm. The Empire failed to see your value. That's our failure, not yours. But I see you now, and I'm asking you to stay, to work with me, to help me build an empire that doesn't discard people just because they're different. The offer was staggering. From maintenance worker to Imperial consul in the space of a conversation. It should have felt impossible, like a dream that would evaporate if she touched it. But the way Kavrith looked at her, with respect, with hope, with something that looked almost like need, made it feel real. Why? She asked. Why does this matter so much to you? He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb absently tracing circles on her palm. Because for 3 centuries, I've ruled through strength, through the power of my bond with Ashkore, through military might, through the fear my name inspires. And it's given me an empire, yes. But it's also given me a realm where people like you are treated as broken simply because you don't fit the mold we've decided is correct, where someone with your gifts would spend their life scrubbing floors instead of being celebrated. He met her gaze directly. You showed me a different kind of strength, the strength of compassion, of seeing pain in others and choosing to help even when it costs you everything. That's the kind of strength I want in my empire. That's the kind of person I want beside me as we try to build something better. Beside you? Elara's heart hammered. Your Majesty, I don't understand what you're asking. I'm asking you to stay, to accept the position I'm offering, to help me fix the things that are broken in this realm, not just bonds, but systems, attitudes, entire ways of thinking. He paused. And I'm asking if you'll allow me to be your friend. Because in 300 years, I've had allies, advisors, subjects, and enemies, but I've had very few true friends, and I'd like you to be one. Friends with an emperor. It should have been absurd. They came from completely different worlds, literally. He was ancient, powerful, a conqueror of galaxies. She was young, damaged, nobody important, but she remembered those 3 days when he'd held her consciousness together, remembered the feeling of his presence wrapped around hers, refusing to let her fall into nothingness. That wasn't the act of an emperor maintaining a useful asset. That was the act of someone who cared. I'll stay, Elara said softly. I'll take the position. And yes, I'd like to be your friend. The smile that broke across Kavrith's face was like sunrise. It transformed him, made him look younger somehow, less weighed down by centuries of command. Thank you. You don't know what that means to me. I think I do. She smiled back. You held me together when I was falling apart. That's what friends do. A soft chime interrupted them. Kavrith glanced at the door. That will be Ashkore. He's been waiting outside since Kyrus told him you were awake. May he come in? Of course. Kavrith stood and opened the door. The massive war beast padded in, moving with surprising delicacy for something so large. All 6 of Ashkore's eyes focused on Elara with an intensity that should have been frightening, but instead felt like being truly seen. The beast approached the bed and lowered its massive head, placing it gently on the mattress beside Elara's leg. The gesture was unmistakable. Gratitude, affection, trust. Elara reached out slowly and placed her hand on Ashkore's scales. The familiar warmth flowed between them, but different now, stronger, more certain. Through the touch, she felt Ashkore's consciousness, not in words, but in impressions and emotions. Relief at her survival. Joy at being free from the corruption's constant pain. Curiosity about this strange human who had saved them. And beneath it all, an invitation. Not a demand or a compulsion, but a genuine question. Would you like to stay connected? Elara looked at Kavrith. He's asking if I want to maintain a connection. Not a full bond. Something smaller. A way to stay in touch. That's your choice entirely, Kavrith said gently. Ashkore and I would both welcome it, but there's no obligation. You've already given more than anyone could ask. Elara thought about it. A connection to Ashkore, and through him, to Kavrith. A permanent reminder of what had happened in the sanctum. It would mean being tied to them in ways she couldn't fully predict. It would change her life even more than the position and citizenship already would. But it would also mean never being alone again, never being invisible, never being dismissed as broken. She met Ashkore's 6-eyed gaze. Yes, I'd like that. The connection formed instantly, not the overwhelming fusion of a nexus bond, but a gentle thread of awareness. Through it, she could feel Ashkore's contentment and Kavrith's surprised delight. It was like having 2 new senses she hadn't possessed before, 2 points of warm awareness in the back of her mind that said you're not alone anymore. Remarkable, Kavrith breathed. I can feel you through the bond. Not completely, not the way Ashkore and I feel each other, but enough to know you're there. To sense your emotional state, your well-being. Is that bad? No, it's perfect. He returned to his chair, Ashkore settling on the floor beside him. This changes things, you understand? You're not just the Imperial Nexus console now, you're connected to the Imperial bond itself. That makes you part of something very few people in history have ever been part of. What does that mean, practically? It means my enemies are now your enemies. My friends are now your friends. And my responsibility to protect what I care about now extends to you. He said it matter-of-factly, but Elara heard the promise underneath. I won't let anyone hurt you, Elara. Not for being different, not for being connected to us, not for any reason. You're under Imperial protection for life. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt right, like a piece sliding into place in a puzzle she hadn't known was incomplete. When can I start working? Elara asked. Kyrus, who'd been standing quietly near the door, made a sound of protest. You need at least another week of recovery before... I've been unconscious for 6 days. I'm awake now. I'm functional. Elara swung her legs over the side of the bed. Vertigo hit her immediately, but she pushed through it. If I'm going to be the Imperial Nexus consul, I should start learning what that actually means. Stubborn, Kavrith observed, but he was smiling. I recognize that trait. I see it in the mirror regularly. She gets it from you now, Kyrus muttered. 3 days in psychic contact and she's already picked up your worst habits. Wonderful. Despite the healer's complaints, they compromised. Elara would stay in the medical suite for another 3 days, but she could begin receiving briefings and educational materials. Kavrith assigned her 2 assistants, a young Korvathi scholar named Vexana, who specialized in unusual bond formations, and a human liaison called Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd been working in the Empire's xenopsychology division. The next 3 days passed in a blur of learning. Elara discovered that her new position was both more important and more ambiguous than she'd realized. There was no precedent for an Imperial Nexus consul. Kavrith had literally invented the position for her. That meant she had to help define what it would be. There are more people with unusual bonds than you'd think, Dr. Chen explained during one briefing. She was a woman in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that held both intelligence and kindness. The Empire's focus on traditional warrior-beast bonds means that anyone who doesn't fit that mold gets dismissed. But there are documented cases of bonds between sentient species, bonds that form through trauma rather than intention, even bonds between beings and places or objects. All of them are considered aberrations, failures, things to be hidden rather than studied. That needs to change, Elara said. Agreed, but change is slow in an empire this large. You're going to face resistance, not just from traditionalists who think bonds should only work one way, but from people who'll see your position as a threat to their authority. Chen's expression was serious. The Emperor's protection will help, but it won't eliminate all danger. You need to be careful. I spent years being invisible, Elara said. I think I can handle being visible for a good reason. On the 4th day, Kyrus finally cleared her to leave the medical suite. Elara dressed in formal robes, deep blue with silver threading that seemed to shimmer when she moved. The colors of the Imperial Nexus consul, designed specifically for her. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger. Someone who looked important. Someone who looked like they belonged. It was the strangest feeling. Kavrith was waiting outside the medical suite, Ashkore beside him. The Emperor had his armor back on, his crown once more resting on his head. But when he saw Elara, his formal demeanor softened. Ready for your first official day? Ready as I'll ever be. Good, because half the court is waiting to meet you, and the other half is waiting to decide if you're a threat. Comforting. I find honesty usually is. He offered his arm. Shall we? Elara took his arm, feeling the connection through Ashkore pulse warmly at the physical contact. Together they walked through the corridors of the Imperial Palace, a maintenance worker turned consul, an emperor and his war beast, connected by bonds that shouldn't exist but did anyway. People stared. Of course they stared. But for the first time in her life, Elara didn't shrink from the attention. She met their gazes steadily, her head held high. She had saved the Emperor's life. She had destroyed a corruption that the Empire's best healers couldn't touch. She had survived what should have killed her and came back changed but whole. She wasn't broken anymore. She was something new. And that, she was learning, was its own kind of strength. They reached the throne room doors. Beyond them, the assembled court waited. Hundreds of the Empire's most powerful figures, all gathered to witness the formal investiture of the new Imperial Nexus consul. Elara felt a moment of nerves, but through the connection she felt Kavrith's steady confidence and Ashkore's calm presence. You've got this, Kavrith said quietly. Elara smiled. We've got this. That's what connections mean, right? We don't have to face things alone anymore. Right. The doors opened onto a throne room that took Elara's breath away. The ceremony that followed was elaborate, formal, and filled with rituals she barely understood. But at the center of it all was a simple truth. She was being recognized. Not as broken, not as worthless, not as someone to be overlooked and dismissed. As someone who mattered. As someone whose differences made her valuable. When Kavrith placed the official seal of her position, a pendant showing intertwined pathways of light around her neck, she felt the weight of it. Responsibility. Purpose. A future that was hers to shape. The Imperial Nexus consul, Kavrith announced to the assembled court. Elara Kane, who saved the Imperial bond and will now serve as advisor and advocate for all those whose connections exist outside traditional understanding. Let it be known throughout the realm, those who are different are not broken. They are simply finding their own paths to strength. The court erupted in applause, some genuine, some polite, some clearly reluctant. Elara didn't care. She had a purpose now, a position, a place where she belonged, and two unlikely friends who'd proven that sometimes the strongest bonds formed in the most unexpected ways. As the ceremony concluded and the court began to disperse, Elara caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. Captain Webb, grinning with obvious pride. Even Theron, the young guard who'd first escorted her through the palace, looking pleased. And there, near the back, Commander Thexus, the Korvathi who'd mocked her so relentlessly on Station Helion 7. His expression was complicated, somewhere between disbelief and grudging respect. Elara met his gaze and smiled. Not smugly, not triumphantly, simply acknowledging that things had changed, that she had changed, that the broken one he'd dismissed had become something he never expected. Then she turned away. He didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the work ahead, helping others like her, reshaping how the Empire viewed bonds, proving that different didn't mean lesser. It would be hard. It would take years, maybe decades. But for the first time in her life, Elara had time. She had support. She had purpose. And she had the friendship of an emperor who'd held her consciousness together when it tried to fall apart. That, she thought, was more than enough to build a future on. 3 years passed like a dream that refused to end. Elara stood on the observation deck of the Imperial Palace, watching the sunrise over Crithion Prime. 3 suns rising in sequence, painting the sky in layers of gold, amber, and rose. She'd watched this sunrise hundreds of times now, and it still took her breath away. Some beautiful things never became ordinary. "You're up early," Kavrith's voice came from behind her. Even after 3 years, the connection through Ashkore let her feel his approach before she heard him. A warm awareness that said, "Friend is near." Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. She turned to face him. He looked different than he had 3 years ago. Less burdened, somehow. The crown still sat on his head. The armor still marked him as Emperor. But his eyes held something they hadn't before. Peace, maybe. Or at least the beginning of it. The council session today. It wasn't a question. Kavrith moved to stand beside her at the viewport. Nervous? Terrified. Elara smiled. "I'm about to propose the most radical restructuring of Imperial bond law in 500 years. Half the council thinks I'm brilliant. The other half thinks I'm dangerous. So yes, terrified seems appropriate. For what it's worth, I think you're both." His tone was warm, teasing in the way he only allowed himself with her. Brilliantly dangerous, or dangerously brilliant. I can never decide which. You're supposed to be encouraging. I am encouraging. I'm encouraging you to be yourself, which happens to be both brilliant and dangerous. He gestured at the planet below. "Look at what you've accomplished in 3 years, Elara. When we first met, you were one person dismissed as broken. Now you've identified and helped over 2,000 individuals with unusual bonds across 40 systems. You've established healing centers on 15 worlds. You've trained 100 new specialists who understand that different doesn't mean defective. That's not just impressive, it's revolutionary." Elara thought about those 3 years. The work had been harder than she'd imagined. For every person grateful to finally receive help, there had been 10 officials who resisted change. For every success story, there had been setbacks and failures. She'd learned that transforming an empire didn't happen through grand gestures. It happened through persistent, patient effort, one small victory at a time. "The Korvathi traditionalists still call me the broken consul," she said. "They say I'm corrupting the purity of the Nexus by legitimizing bonds that should never exist. And the people you've helped call you the Lightbringer. They say you gave them hope when they had none." Kavrith's hand found hers, scaled fingers intertwining with human ones in a gesture that had become comfortable over the years. "You can't please everyone, Elara. The question is, are you proud of the work you're doing?" She thought about the faces she'd seen in the past 3 years. The young Korvathi woman who'd bonded with her twin sister instead of a war beast, dismissed as deviant until Elara proved their connection was genuine and powerful. The human merchant who'd formed an unusual bond with his ship's AI, giving both of them capabilities neither possessed alone. The elderly veteran whose bond had been damaged in battle and who'd spent 20 years being told there was no hope, until Elara found a way to help him reconnect with his partner. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm proud. Even when it's hard. Even when people fight me, I'm proud." "Then the council can say what they will. You have the Emperor's support, and that's not changing." He squeezed her hand. "Now, let's discuss your proposal. Walk me through it one more time." They spent the next hour reviewing her plans. The proposal was ambitious, a complete revision of how the Empire classified and regulated bonds. Instead of one narrow definition of correct bonding, Elara was proposing a spectrum approach that recognized different types of connections as equally valid. It would require rewriting laws, retraining officials, and fundamentally changing how the Empire thought about the Nexus. The resistance will be fierce, Kavrith warned, particularly from the military faction. They've built their entire structure around traditional warrior-beast bonds. Asking them to accept other forms as equally legitimate threatens their power base. I know, but it's necessary. As long as the Empire only values one type of bond, people like me, people with different connections, will always be treated as lesser. We need systemic change, not just individual accommodations. Agreed, but systemic change takes time. We have time. Elara looked at him. Don't we? Something flickered across Kavrith's expression. Hesitation, uncertainty, something she'd rarely seen in 3 years of working beside him. There's something I need to tell you. Before the council session, something I've been delaying. Elara's stomach tightened. Through the connection to Ashkore, she felt a complex swirl of emotions from both of them. Anticipation, fear, hope, uncertainty. What is it? Kavrith was silent for a long moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. Finally, he spoke. In 2 months, I'll have ruled this empire for 300 years. That's longer than any emperor before me. Longer than most species' entire civilizations. And I'm tired, Elara. Not physically. The bond with Ashkore keeps me vital. But tired of carrying the weight of billions of lives, of making decisions that determine who lives and who dies, of being the symbol everyone looks to rather than the person I actually am. You're thinking of stepping down. Elara's voice was barely a whisper. I'm thinking of transitioning power. Not abandoning the throne entirely, but sharing it. Creating a council of equals. 5 leaders from different parts of the Empire who would rule together, with me as a 6th voice rather than the sole authority. He met her gaze. And I'm asking you to be one of those 5. The words hit like a physical blow. Me? Kavrith, I can't rule an empire. I've been a consul for 3 years. Before that, I was cleaning floors. I don't have the experience, the knowledge. You have something more important. You have the ability to see people that others overlook, to find value in what others dismiss, to build connections that shouldn't exist but do anyway. His grip on her hand tightened. The Empire doesn't need another warrior conqueror. It needs people who can help it grow beyond conquest, who can show it how to be strong without being cruel, powerful without being oppressive. You've already started that transformation. I'm asking you to help finish it. Elara's mind raced. Ruling an empire, being responsible not just for unusual bonds, but for entire systems, billions of lives, decisions that would echo through generations. It was too much, too big. She was still learning how to be a consul, how to navigate court politics, how to present herself as someone whose opinions mattered. But through the connection to Ashkore, she felt Kavrith's certainty, his absolute belief that she could do this. More than that, his faith that she should do this. Who else would be on this council? She asked carefully. General Thrace to represent military interests, Counselor Everon for civilian governance, Master Healer Kairos for health and well-being, and Admiral Wei for exploration and expansion. He smiled slightly. And you, representing those whose voices have traditionally been ignored, those who don't fit neat categories, those who are different. You've thought this through. For 2 years. Ever since I realized that saving my bond with Ashkore wasn't enough. The corruption that nearly killed us was just a symptom of a larger problem, an empire that's grown rigid, that values conformity over innovation, that crushes anything that doesn't fit its narrow definitions of strength. His voice grew passionate. I built this realm through conquest, Elara, but I don't want that to be its only legacy. I want it to be remembered for how it grew beyond its violent origins, for how it learned to value all its people, not just the warriors, and I need people like you to help make that happen. Elara looked out at Crithion Prime, at the cities spreading across the planet's surface, at the ships moving between orbital platforms. Billions of lives, all interconnected in the vast web of Imperial society. The thought of being responsible for even a fraction of that was overwhelming. But she thought about the people she'd helped in 3 years. The lives changed, the hope restored, the futures made possible. And she thought about all the people still waiting, still dismissed as broken, still overlooked, still convinced they didn't matter. If I say yes, she said slowly, I have conditions. Name them. First, The restructuring of bond law happens. Not eventually. Not when the time is right, but within the first year of the new council. Agreed. Second, we establish a network of support centers on every major world in the Empire. Places where anyone with an unusual bond or nexus issue can receive help without judgment. I was going to suggest that myself. What else? Third, Elara turned to face him fully. You don't disappear. You said you're tired, and I understand that. But you don't get to hand off responsibility and vanish. You stay involved. You mentor. You use your centuries of experience to help us avoid your mistakes and build on your successes. Kavrith smiled, and it was the warmest expression she'd ever seen from him. I wasn't planning to disappear, just to step back enough that the Empire learns to function without being so dependent on one person's will. But yes, I'll stay involved. How could I not? You'll be there, and where you go, Ashkore and I follow. The connection between them pulsed with warmth, affection, trust, friendship that had grown deeper than Elara would have believed possible 3 years ago. She'd gone from being invisible to being essential, from being broken to being necessary. And through it all, Kavrith had been there, sometimes as Emperor, sometimes as friend, always as someone who saw her value when no one else did. Then I'll do it, she said. I'll join your Council of Equals. But Kavrith, if I fail, if I make terrible decisions, you'll learn from them and do better next time. That's all anyone can do. He pulled her into an embrace, something that would have scandalized the court 3 years ago, but had become accepted as the Emperor's odd habit of treating his consul like family. Thank you, Elara, for saying yes, for trusting me, for being willing to help build something better. Thank you for seeing me in the first place, for kneeling in a docking bay and asking a broken maintenance worker if she could do the impossible. You were never broken, just different. He released her, his expression turning serious. Now, we have a council session to prepare for. Your bond law proposal first, then my announcement about the transition. It's going to be a long day. The best ones usually are. The council chamber was packed. Every seat filled, with additional observers crowding the upper galleries. Word had spread that something significant was happening today, and the court's most powerful figures had gathered to witness it. Elara stood at the presentation platform, her formal robes perfect, her notes organized, her arguments rehearsed, but her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment when 3 years of work either became Imperial law or died in committee. She began her presentation, laying out the proposal step by step, the current system's limitations, the documented cases of people harmed by narrow definitions, the benefits of recognizing diverse bond types, the practical implementation plans. She spoke clearly, professionally, with the confidence she'd learned to project even when she felt anything but confident inside. The questions came fast and harsh. This undermines our military structure, General Thrace argued. He was a massive Korvathi with scales like hammered bronze and a voice that could cut through armor. For 500 years, we've maintained strength through standardized warrior-beast bonds. Your proposal would legitimize connections that have no combat utility. With respect, General, bonds have value beyond combat, Elara countered. The merchant I mentioned earlier bonded with his ship's AI. He's revolutionized cargo transport in the outer systems. The twin sisters with their unusual connection? They've become our most effective diplomatic team because they can coordinate perfectly without technology. Different bonds serve different purposes. All of them strengthen the Empire. She's right, Admiral Wei spoke up. The human woman was one of the Empire's highest-ranking officers, and her support carried weight. I've seen the data from the systems that have implemented Consul Kane's pilot programs. Productivity is up. Morale is up. We're seeing innovations we never would have discovered if we'd insisted everyone fit the same mold. The debate raged for hours. Arguments for and against, concerns raised and addressed, compromises suggested and negotiated. Through it all, Elara held her ground. She'd learned in 3 years that changing minds required patience, persistence, and a willingness to listen even to the harshest criticism. Finally, Kavrith stood. The entire chamber fell silent instantly. I have heard the arguments on both sides, he said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of authority. And I have made my decision. The Imperial Nexus Consul's proposal is sound, necessary, and long overdue. It will be implemented as written, with a transition period of 1 year to allow for proper training and system adjustments. The chamber erupted, some in celebration, others in protest. Kavrith waited for silence, then continued. Furthermore, I have an announcement regarding the future of Imperial governance. As of 2 months from today, I will be transitioning from sole emperor to first among equals in a new council structure. 5 individuals, chosen for their expertise, their integrity, and their vision for a better empire, will share governance responsibilities with me. The shock in the room was palpable. An emperor hadn't voluntarily shared power in the empire's entire history. Kavrith named the council members one by one. Each name brought gasps, murmurs, speculation. When he reached Elara's name, the chamber went silent. Imperial Nexus Consul Elara Kane will represent those whose voices have traditionally been excluded from power, those who are different, dismissed, or overlooked. She will ensure that as we grow, we do not leave behind those who don't fit convenient categories. The silence stretched. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone began to applaud. Others joined. Within moments, the chamber was filled with sound, some applauding enthusiastically, others politely, some sitting with arms crossed in clear disapproval. But even the disapprovers couldn't deny what had just happened. The empire had changed, irrevocably. The celebration that night was smaller, more intimate. Just Elara, Kavrith, the other council members, and a handful of close advisors. They gathered in one of the palace's private gardens, where crystalline trees grew in defiance of normal botany, and the air smelled like distant oceans. To the future, Admiral Wei raised her glass. May we be half as wise as we need to be, and twice as brave as we think we are. They drank to that. Elara found herself standing beside Master Healer Kyrus, who'd been watching her with an appraising expression. 3 years ago, I thought you'd be dead within a week, Kyrus said bluntly. I'm pleased to have been wrong. So am I, Elara agreed. Don't let it go to your head. You have decades of hard work ahead of you. The Empire doesn't transform overnight. I know, but it does transform. One person at a time, one decision at a time, one small victory at a time. Spoken like someone who's learned the long game. Kyrus smiled. You'll do well on the council, Consul. Just remember, take care of yourself as diligently as you take care of others. The Empire needs you healthy. General Thrace approached next. He'd voted against her proposal in the council session, but his expression now was respectful. We disagree on policy, Consul Kane, but I respect your conviction and your courage. Not many people would stand before the Imperial Council and demand change. Someone had to, Elara said simply. True. Just don't expect me to make it easy for you. I'll fight for what I believe is right, same as you. I wouldn't want it any other way. Good governance requires debate. He nodded, seeming satisfied, and moved on. Elara watched him go, thinking about how much had changed. 3 years ago, she'd been terrified of authority figures. Now she could disagree with a general and feel confident doing it. You've come a long way. Kavrith appeared at her elbow, Ashkore padding silently behind him. From the maintenance worker who was afraid to meet my eyes to the council member who lectures generals about governance. You taught me, Elara said. You showed me that my voice mattered, that being different was strength, not weakness, that I didn't have to shrink to fit other people's expectations. I showed you the door. You're the one who walked through it. He looked out over the garden, at the impossible trees, and the gathering of people who would help shape the Empire's future. Do you ever regret it? Touching Ashkore that day? Everything that's happened since? Elara thought about it honestly. The pain, the fear, the moment of dissolution, the 3 days of holding her consciousness together, the years of hard work and resistance, the weight of responsibility that would only grow heavier as she took her place on the council. No, she said finally. Not for a moment. Because the alternative was staying invisible, staying broken, staying convinced I didn't matter, and I'd rather die trying to make a difference than live safely invisible. Good answer. Kavrith smiled. Because I need you here, Elara, not just as a council member, as a friend, as someone who keeps me honest, as someone who reminds me why all this, he gestured at the palace, the city, the empire beyond, matters in the first place. Through the connection to Ashkore, Elara felt the depth of his sincerity. 3 years of friendship had created something neither of them had expected, a bond that wasn't romantic or formal, but deeply true. They'd saved each other in different ways, and they'd continue to save each other as they faced whatever came next. We're going to do good things, Elara said quietly. The 6 of us, working together. We're going to make the Empire better. Not perfect, probably not even good by some measures, but better than it was. More inclusive, more just. more willing to see value in unexpected places. Yes, we are. Kavrith placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and affection. And when future historians write about this time, they'll call it the era of transformation, when an emperor learned to share power, when an empire learned to value all its people, when a maintenance worker called Broken showed the galaxy what real strength looks like. That's too much credit. I just helped where I could. That's exactly what made the difference. You didn't try to conquer or command, you just helped, one person at a time, until helping became transformation. He squeezed her shoulder gently. Come on, Ashkore wants to show you something. The beast had wandered to a section of the garden where the crystalline trees grew thickest. When Elara and Kavrith approached, Ashkore made a low, rumbling sound and gestured with his head toward a particular tree. There, carved into the crystal trunk with precise care, were 3 symbols intertwined, one representing Kavrith, one for Ashkore, one for Elara. When did you do this? Elara breathed. Yesterday. While you were preparing your council presentation, Kavrith traced the symbols with one scaled finger. It's tradition for bonded partners to mark significant locations, places where important moments happened. This garden is where we gathered after your investiture 3 years ago, where we became not just emperor and consul, but friends. I wanted to mark it. Elara touched the symbol representing her, a simple design of intersecting lines that looked almost like her fractured nexus pathways. It was beautiful in its imperfection. Thank you for everything, for seeing me, for giving me a chance, for being my friend when I needed one most. Kavrith's voice was soft. The thanks go both ways, Elara. You saved my life, you saved Ashkore, and you saved me from becoming the tyrant I was well on my way to being. That's worth more than any empire. They stood together in the garden, an emperor, a war beast, and a woman who'd been called too broken to matter, connected by bonds that shouldn't exist but did anyway. The future stretched before them, uncertain and full of challenges, but they'd face it together, because that's what connections meant, what friendships meant, what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself. Elara thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, scrubbing floors in a docking bay, invisible and dismissed, convinced she was broken beyond repair. That girl would never have believed this future was possible, would never have imagined standing in an Imperial garden as an equal to the most powerful being in the galaxy. But that girl had been wrong about being broken. She'd just been waiting for someone to see her differently, to recognize that her cracks let the light in rather than letting her value drain out. What are you thinking? Kavrith asked. Elara smiled. That they called me broken, too fragile to bond, too damaged to matter, and they were wrong about everything. Yes, they were. Kavrith looked up at the stars visible through the garden's transparent dome. The question is, what do we do now? Now? Elara's smile widened. Now we prove them even more wrong. We show the Empire that different is powerful, that compassion is strength, that the people who don't fit the mold are exactly the ones who can reshape it. An ambitious goal. I learned from an ambitious emperor. Ashkore rumbled in what might have been approval or amusement. Through their connection, Elara felt his contentment, his satisfaction with how things had turned out. The corruption that had nearly killed him was long gone, replaced by a bond stronger than ever. And now that bond included a strange third thread, not a full partnership, but a connection that let him sense Elara's presence, her well-being, her fierce determination to make things better. They stayed in the garden until the stars wheeled overhead and Krithion's 3 moons rose in sequence. They talked about plans for the council, about challenges ahead, about hopes and fears, and the weight of responsibility they'd all chosen to carry. But mostly, they simply existed together, 3 beings bound by bonds that defied categorization, united by the choice to care about each other, despite every reason not to. When they finally left the garden, Elara looked back at the carved symbols one last time. In the moonlight, they gleamed like promises made in crystal, promises to stay connected, to support each other, to build something better than what came before. She'd been called broken, fragile, too damaged to matter. And she'd proven that sometimes what the world calls broken is simply a different way of being whole. As she walked through the Imperial Palace, her home now, her place of work, her center of power, Elara felt the connection to Kavrith and Ashkore pulse warmly in the back of her mind, a reminder that she wasn't alone, that she never would be again. The Empire stretched before her, vast and complicated and full of people who needed what she could offer. The understanding that different didn't mean lesser, that being fractured could create new pathways, that the strength to endure was its own kind of power. 3 years ago, she'd been invisible. Today, she was seen. Tomorrow, she'd help others be seen too. And that, she thought, as 3 moons painted the palace halls in silver light, was exactly the kind of future worth fighting for. The end.